Welcome to another episode of The Writer's Dream. This is a show where authors can talk about how they write their books, how they produce their books, and how they market their books. You will find us on YouTube, and you will find us on Facebook page. Both of them are called The Writer's Dream, guess what? We have about, I would say, close to 200 guests now. I've been doing this for 9 years. So if you're a writer, or you're a reader, or you're interested in getting a book out there, you would be very interested in listening to the various interviews that we have, because we give a lot of information on how one produces a book. So without further ado, our guest today is Pauli Libsohn. Pauli has been here a number of times because she is a very busy writer. So Pauli, tell us what you're up to.
Okay, well, I just finished my 7th book, and that is The Ballet with Encores. And this book concludes this whole series of books that I wrote with regard to my parents, their story, and myself. And it all started out with my mother's poetry that I edited and arranged and published for her after she passed away. And then after that, what I did was I wrote a story about my parents' love affair. And that is the biography that I wrote, What is Love? And I was prevailed upon to write that by the several audiences to which I spoke about all my mother's writings and her relationship with my father. And then after that, what happened was I found poetry that was exchanged between my parents that I never knew about. And I could not get over it. It reminded me of Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Robert Browning.
Right.
And the poetry in those cards and letters that I found were so gorgeous that I felt I had to publish them. Because in today's world, nobody writes poetry like that to one another. And it just swept me off my feet. And I had to let everyone know how my parents felt about one another and how they captured it in writing form. And so what I did was I categorized all the poems: Mother's Day, Father's Day, birthdays, moving day, holidays, whatever. And then I wrote about what we did on those holidays as a family. And I incorporated those poems into those sections. And it's very, very unusual. And what it is, it's like a capsule of life, of our lives. And it's really like a screenplay. And I had
Speaking
of. And I had a lot of fun writing it and putting it together. And then after I finished that, someone prevailed upon me to write a play. And using one of the chapters in the book, What is Love? And one of the most important chapters in that book is called The Ballet, because that really changed my parents' lives. And what that was about was that my father had 2 tickets to the ballet that he and his mother were going to see, but his mother had to cancel because of a previous engagement. My parents at that point had broken up. They had previously been dating for about 5 years. And then for some reason they broke up. Why? I never found out. They never discussed it. And
well, I think from all of the stories you told me, because I think this is important to fill in, how old was your mother when she met your father?
My mother was 12, my father was 17.
Was 12 years old, and your father was this devilishly handsome
Yes.
lifeguard
Yes.
at Rockaway, right?
Yes.
And your mother set eyes on him, and
she decided at 12 years old she was going to marry him.
And she lured him into her sphere of influence and charm with books.
That's right.
This is such an unlikely story.
That's right.
So I think possibly your father and mother came to the realization that, what are we doing? And they went on with their lives.
That's
and
right.
then bingo, what happened in the subway station?
Well, what happened is that they had this passionate relationship, and then, as you say, bingo. My mother went on to college, and my father had already graduated college, and World War II was just starting. It was looming off in the distance.
And that's a life-changing experience.
So they really had to go their own way. And then on the subway platform that day when my father was there with those tickets, comes a train from the opposite direction in the subway at Kew Gardens. And who gets off that train but my mother? And she was coming in from Queens College. And she gets off, and in the distance, she sees my father. And she yells, "David!" And she goes running to him. And the two of them, they were in such disbelief, they couldn't believe it. And they fell into one another's arms. And my mother kept saying, "What are you doing here?" And my father told her about the ballet and his mother. And my mother realized that he was interested in the ballet because of her. And all their discussions on the beach with literature, about plays, about musicals, about the arts, and that's how he became interested in the ballet. And so she said to him, she said, "This is because of me." And he looked at her and he said, "Listen," he said, "why don't you accompany me?" And she said, "Yes." And she grabbed him. And then they went off together on the other train going into the city. They went to the ballet that night, and they both realized that this was it. And my father proposed marriage to her. That night.
Wow.
Yes. They told me that story all the time.
Okay, now I'd like to get into the weeds of how you decided that you were going to do all these poetry books. How old was she when she started writing poetry?
Okay. I took a course. Oh, but first I just want to say one thing which is very unusual. The way I wrote this play, the ballet, the lines in this book are all the lines from her poetry. Because I could not write dialogue. And I couldn't figure out how I was going to do dialogue. So I said to myself, all her poems tell the story of her affair with my father. So take her lines telling that story and incorporate them into this play. So everything that I have written in this play, the ballet, they're all the lines from her poetry. And that's how I wrote that play, which I feel is highly unusual. Because no one ever.
Highly unusual.
Yes, and even the narration, it's all from her poems and all from her writings.
Okay, so how old was she when she started? Do you think it was in college?
Okay, so she started, well, she and my father started to exchange poetry together from, it's probably earlier, but I found the earliest poems 1944.
Okay.
So they probably were doing it before that, but she didn't save anything. And all those poems are included in Messages of Love Remembered. Okay?
Right.
That's the first one. Then it was followed by
Immortal Kisses?
No.
Okay.
The ballet with encores. These are their personal poetry. Okay? That I wrote about. However, the poems that I incorporated into Immortal Kisses, she started writing those in 1971 because of a creative writing course that I took at C.W. Post College. And that was the only reason
And that
why.
was the only poem you ever wrote, right?
Right. God.
I know.
I never.
So I mean, I've read the poems, and they are, if you love poetry, they are really beautiful poems.
Right.
So tell me about the journey that you took to, you found them in a box in a drawer, and how did you think of getting them published?
Well, what happened is that she wrote all this poetry, and she was writing because of my course, she would really write a poem a day. And every day that I came home from college, she would call me into the kitchen and she'd say to me, I wrote another poem. And then she'd read it to me, and I'd go over it with her. And I would say yes, no. I would tell her that I liked the name of the title that she chose. I would tell her that I didn't like a certain line. And we'd go over it together, and then we'd sit at the typewriter and I would type them up. And this went on for 35 years.
Oh my God.
And sitting at the kitchen table. But what happened during the course of that 35 years was that I happened to buy a book of Robert Frost's poetry, a collection. And I was reading that poetry, and all of a sudden it dawned on me that my mother's poems reminded me of Robert Frost's poetry. And I said, my mother is better than Robert Frost. I really believe that. So it was 10 o'clock at night, and I went flying downstairs, and I woke up my parents with this big announcement. And I told them, I said, look, I said to my mother, I said, your poetry is better than Robert Frost. My father was laughing uncontrollably. He couldn't believe it. And I said, you better listen to me. So at that hour of the night, I went into their closet, got out her poetry, and started to read it. And it was at that point that my mother realized that she really had talent and that I had something. So then I said to her, I said, listen, I said, from now on, we're going to work on a manuscript. So she continued to write, and we worked on a manuscript. And we worked on that manuscript, I guess, for about almost 10 years. And I said, you have to think of a title. So she thought of the title, Confessions of a Poet. But then what happened is that my father passed away. And then she kind of stopped, but she continued. And we were still writing, and I said, look, we really have to get going on this. And so what I did was I submitted these poems to publishers, but I got rejections. And they said because we were unknown, my mother was unknown, and they couldn't take a chance, and I needed an agent, which I wasn't going to get then. So then what happened was my mother passed away. I put all her poetry, everything, in her closet, and I left it there for 3 years.
Yeah.
And then after 3 years, I took it out, and I said to myself, I made a promise to my mother that I was going to publish these, and I got to work on it. And I arranged them, I edited them, I found the publisher, and I published them.
The most amazing thing, well, the most amazing thing is the poetry, but the most amazing thing to me, because I get my own books published as well, is how many years have you been working on this?
Okay, 7 books came out in 6 years.
Yeah, see? That's,
it's unbelievable.
Right, you really worked very hard to get all of this together.
It was nonstop. I couldn't stop. The minute one was finished, I started on the next. And even while I was working on one, I had 2 in the works. It was amazing because I kept finding material of my mother's, and I had to get it out. And then, as I said, I was prevailed upon to write this book, What is Love, which is the biography and the story of their love affair. And I wrote that in 6 days, which I still can't believe. I took 4 days off from work. I had the weekend. And
we don't say those things on the air.
and I wrote it. And it was nonstop. And then everything else followed. As I said, I found these poems that my parents wrote between one another and exchanged with one another, and that's how these last 2 books came out. And because of this last book, The Ballet with Encores, I wrote a section in that book called Dearest Pauli, and that section is compiled of poetry that they wrote to me as a little girl. And I wrote about that. And then I said to myself, you know, I had such an exceptional childhood, and I was very lucky. I realized that.
Yeah.
And I had so many different experiences that gave me the idea to write children's books.
Yeah, so this venture with your mom's
Yes.
poetry and her lessons and all the things that she came up with, this is a project completed, and now you're launching into children's books.
Correct.
So tell us about children's books.
Okay, so by writing that last section in the Ballet with Encores, I made a list of all the different adventures that I had when I was a child that I thought would be perfect for children of today. And so I came up with 8 ideas, and I started to write. And I wrote 8 books in less than a year, all 45 to 55 pages, and they're for the ages of children between 5 and 10. During that process, I happened to find another 3 stories that my mother wrote, and I thought that they would be perfect for children, and I adapted them. So that adds up to the 11 children's books. Those 3 books are coming out first, the ones of my mother's that I adapted. And again, they're being put out by Page Publishing, and also they're doing all the illustrations. And they too are for between the ages of 5 to 10. And the stories that my mother wrote, Runaway, which is the story of a little boy who runs away to join the circus, is based on a little boy that she knew when she was growing up who actually did run away to join the circus, and the whole block went out looking for him. Finally, they found him. The second one that she wrote, Letter for Molly, is based on a little girl who invites her teacher, writes a letter to her teacher, and invites her to an almost garden tea party, and she waits for that letter to come. And finally it does come, and then what happens? And then the third one is a story of how she and her family waited for her grandfather to come and visit, and what happened during those visits that her grandfather made. So all those books that my mother wrote, that she didn't know that she was really writing for children until I decided to publish them, really did come true. They really did occur.
Now then, the other 8 books
The
have one main character, yes?
Yes, Penelope.
So tell me about Penelope.
Okay, so Penelope is really me. Okay.
Of course.
And right. And
The previous guest says that it's
Yes.
impossible for authors to write without putting a piece of themselves
That's
in their
right.
book. So
and all the stories that I wrote are really true. The first one that I wrote is called Penelope's New Bed. And it's the story of how I got my first bed. And I'll never forget, my parents called me into the kitchen of our duplex apartment in Fresh Meadows and told me that I was getting a new bed that was coming all the way from Paris, France, and it was going to sail across the ocean and going to arrive at an antique store in Manhattan, and we were going to pick it up. Well, I was so excited. I mean, I couldn't calm down. And the thought that I was getting a one-of-a-kind antique brass bed that no one else in the whole world was going to have, and meanwhile it was so old, but it was so new. So I wrote the story about how all this came about and the excitement in getting this bed and what happened after I got it and how we had to travel into Manhattan to the antique store. And the second book is how Penelope really...
Well, wait a minute. Let's wait.
Okay.
Do you still have the brass bed?
Well, I had it up until the time that we had to sell our house and move to the condo where I am now. So I had it up until I was 55 years old.
Okay.
Yes, we never gave, but we couldn't fit it into
Right.
where we live now, so I had to sell it.
So this kind of story actually lends itself to some great illustrations.
Yes.
So
Fabulous illustrations.
you did show me Penelope. It's too bad we don't have a picture of Penelope, but maybe next time.
Next time.
But
I have
She's an important part of your books.
Yes, she is. She's the main character of all of them.
Describe her.
Describe her how she looks, or describe her what she...
Both.
Okay, well, I have her looking the way I looked when I was a little girl. I had an adorable round face, little chubby.
Weren't we all?
And I had braids, and my mother always put ribbons in them. And I was always dressed in the cutest little outfits. My mother dressed me in like a little corduroy jacket, plaid, and a little pants that matched, and little red shoes with little white socks. And this is how Penelope looked. And in all these books, she's about 5 years old. And she's an adorable little girl. She's an only child. And her parents dote on her. And really, she doesn't realize how lucky she is. But in one of the books, she does, and that's Penelope's New Bike, where she gets her first two-wheel bicycle, but then what to do with her tricycle. And so she and her parents decide to give it to this little girl, Ellen, who lives around the block, who can't afford a bike of her own and who isn't as lucky as she is. Mm-hmm. And she couldn't wait to give it to this little girl. And even though the little girl couldn't afford the bike, she in turn gave Penelope a gift of her own for the bike. And Penelope could not get over that. And that really happened to me, because the little girl around the block was really Ellen. I mean, I had my little friend Ellen, who in my mind was poor. Whether she really was poor or not, I don't know. Yeah. But she seemed like that to me at that age. I was 5. Mm-hmm. And she was so grateful, and we became very close friends. And her parents were so grateful. And that teaches a lesson.
Now, do all of the books have lessons?
All the books have lessons.
Yeah, that's very important with kids'
All
books.
the books have lessons. Penelope's New Bed, the lesson is patience. She had to wait for that bed to come.
That's so hard for kids.
Yes. The second book, the Santa Claus book, is Don't Believe Everything That You Hear. The third book, based on the fact that she made friends with a little wren when she was growing up, and she named that wren Wendy, and she became friends with that wren all summer.
The bird.
The bird, uh-huh. And it shows that even though you're friendly with a little creature, they still have the same emotions that a person does. And she learned that that little bird loved her just as much as anybody else could love her. And she loved her back. And the friendship then ensued. And then the next one, Penelope's half birthday, the lesson is the gift of giving, because her half birthday occurred on Mother's Day. And she always made her mother 12 potholders. And her mother and father in turn gave her a gift. But yet, she was more excited to give her mother the gift that she made for her than getting the gift. So it's the gift of giving.
Yeah, the gift is in the giving.
That's right.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So now that, how long is it going to take to get the whole group
series
of books
out?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so my mother's the first 3 books, my mother's, they're supposed to be out by the end of November. Hopefully.
Oh, that's good.
Okay.
Right before Christmas.
Yes.
Then we think about marketing, right?
Yes. Oh. And then the Penelope books, they're at the
Illustrator?
No, they're at the publisher now.
Okay.
And they're just starting production on them. So hopefully they'll all be out by the end of the summer, beginning of fall for next year, because I didn't realize how long it takes for illustrated books.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a tremendous amount of time. So I want them all to come out at once, because it's a series. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then I have 5 other ideas that I'm going to work on, and I'll write those books at my leisure. But I wrote all these.
Also, you really should back up a little bit, because you're going to have to think about marketing.
I know.
And of course, in the age of the pandemic that we're going through,
Mm-hmm.
marketing is not as easy
right.
as it was before. So you really have to give some thought to perhaps a blog associated with your website,
Right.
a Facebook page,
Right.
and all of those things, they have to be monitored and babysat.
Right, I
And, it takes, because I have all of those things. I have
Right.
a newsletter and whatnot, and it takes so much time.
It does.
And every once in a while, I just throw up my hands and say, how am I ever going to write if I have to constantly be monitoring all of these
Right.
things?
Right.
And I know you and I have the same technical assistant who helps us with this stuff,
Yes.
because otherwise it would be impossible.
I know.
But I think this is going to be really exciting for you.
I know. I can't wait. I really can't wait.
One of these days, if you're able to retire, then you can, by that time, hopefully do school visits and readings
Right.
in libraries.
Right.
Well, you could do readings in libraries now on
Right.
Saturdays.
I would like that.
Yeah.
You
So, what's the status of the play?
Oh, the status of the play, it's still in consideration
Yeah.
because of the pandemic.
Sure. Yeah.
You know?
Everything dropped dead.
Right.
With this, I'm sorry.
But I want to say that I did win a wonderful award
Oh.
that I could not believe. I was named Best North Shore Author on Long Island,
Excellent.
which I could not. I almost fainted when I
See, that's
found
because
that
you did a
out.
really smart thing when you started to publish these books. Is you
Yes.
went local and you went to
Yes.
the local newspapers,
Mhm.
and so you got known, and
Yes.
that's how these things happen.
Yes.
You don't get known unless you put the work into
Right.
it, and sometimes you're better off doing your own publicist work than hiring
Right.
somebody because you know the local people.
Right, that's
Well,
what I
Pauli,
did.
we have just a few seconds left. Believe
Okay.
it or not, the
Oh my
time just
God.
flies.
Yes.
And I wish you the best of luck with
Thank you.
Penelope, and I
Yes.
look forward to seeing her, and maybe we'll have a Penelope doll.
Yeah, I was thinking of that. You
Yes.
know that? I
Uh-huh.
really was.
Yeah, that would be adorable.
Yes.
Does Penelope have a dog or a cat?
Well, we're going to do one about cats. So
Oh, very good.
Yes.
So it'll be Penelope and
yes,
the cat.
that's right.
I look forward to this.
8 cats.
Oh, all right. Thank you for being on the show.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.